Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your very kind invitation to speak here at the Gaming Money Conference. Gambling Compliance is a London and Washington, D.C.-based research firm that specializes in providing up-to-the-minute information on regulatory change across the gambling industry worldwide. It's no exaggeration to say that the Eurozone debt crisis has massively amplified the political risks around gambling, and nowhere more so than in Greece, where a restructuring of the whole gambling market is underway, but in the most extreme political circumstances. Just as anyone in the investment community now needs a knowledge of the political working of member states that were probably of little interest 12 months ago, so stakeholders in the European gambling sector have now need to know, for example, what the minutiae of the German constitution says, what the policy on lottery privatization for Spain's opposition party is, and the differences, for example, in views on betting tax between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in Ireland. All of this represents an incredible level of detail that was formerly probably just not relevant to most investors. So this morning I wanted, before handing over to our first panel, to outline some of the trends in regulation across the EU and put the Greek market in the context of those developments. Obviously, there's no coincidence that some of the member states most affected by the Eurozone debt crisis, Ireland, Greece, Spain, Portugal, are among those most urgently reviewing their regulatory positions with regard to online gambling and with regard to slot machine gambling. I apologize if some of this material replicates what Manuel had earlier, but this is another map of prohibited jurisdictions across Europe. Now, 2.3 billion euros is our estimate of the size of the legal Greek gambling market in 2010. That's in gross gaming revenue terms. Of this figure, 71% is accounted for by the monopolist OPAP, 5% by the state lottery, 2% by the casino industry, and the other 2% by the horse racing businesses. Our estimate of the total size of the legal gaming market in Greece once VLTs, scratch cards, and online gaming has been regulated is closer to 6 billion. So how will 2.3 billion euros become 6 billion euros in this adverse economic climate? Well, most of this additional growth will come from new products, with VLTs expected to represent more than 40% of the total market by 2015. The current status of Greece's land-based market is well known. The gaming sector is mostly controlled by one licensed entity, OPAP, at present still owned by the state, though for how much longer is far from certain. In turnover terms, the Greek gaming market is worth more than 8 billion euros and represents a per capita spend of 740 euros per person, high by international standards. But the per capita figure is very much higher than that due to the size of the unregulated market, and capturing the unregulated spend, as has been done in Italy, will be key to meeting any growth forecasts for the Greek gambling market. Unfortunately, this goes over much of the ground that's already been covered, but Greece's new draft law on gambling would license up to 35,000 new slot machines and internet gambling for the first time. The plans envisage 15 to 50 online gambling licenses, with most forms of betting and gambling allowed, apart from betting exchanges, which are expressly prohibited. The licenses would last for 5 years, and tax would be at 30% of gross gaming revenue, with online licensees, as we've heard, obliged to pay that tax from the 1st of January 2010, effectively a retrospective entry tax into the market. However, how much of this will be implemented this year or next is very far from clear, and there have already been vocal protests from some lobbying groups representing Europe's online gambling operators. What then can be expected in Greece from VLT and online regulation? Certainly, Italy has given a very clear example of the possible revenue upside to be gained from regulating VLTs and new products. The market has substantially outperformed early expectations in Italy, with a win slot per day figure of early expectations of a win slot per day figure of around 80 euros a machine, easily exceeded, and current performances are now showing win per machine per day in the region of 180 euros. Last month, in October, with a little more than half of the eventual estate of 57,000 VLTs in place in Italy, turnover on VLTs had reached 1.2 billion euros. At the same time, the country's 350,000 slot machines generated additional spend of 2.4 billion. A year ago, in October 2010, with no competition from VLTs at all, slots turned over 2.8 billion. So Italy's slot machines have already nearly recovered their pre-VLT levels of spend, while the newly arrived machines have added close to 1 billion in fresh spend. For Italy's online products, too, the story of regulation has been a success for the government. Latest figures show total stakes for the year to date at just shy of 1.5 billion euro, with a taxable margin to the government of 80 million. In the same period just a year ago, spend on all online gaming products amounted to just 400 million euros, with tax of just 45 million. So while turnover has tripled, tax has also nearly doubled. The success of Italy's market has been largely due to a benign tax environment backed up with rigorous protection and enforcement against grey market operators offering into Italy. And in recent weeks, that has included using anti-money laundering legislation to track and tax player winnings from offshore sites. One player was handed a 1.2 million euro fine for a win of 6 million euros on a foreign offshore poker site. Still, it's worth noting that the gains made by the country's regulators in optimizing the gaming tax structure are far from clear-cut. One concern now hangs over further austerity-driven tax changes. The latest round of revenue raising under the so-called Manovra Bis package of taxes saw a 20% player winning tax imposed on machine and lottery winnings over 500 euro. There are also considerable uncertainties hanging over the legalities of many of the licenses offered, with Stanleybet's long-running legal case set to be decided by the European Court next year on the point of whether Italy did indeed meet the European requirements in their Bassani tender process that they launched in 2006. Just to move on to France, which offers a thoroughly different perspective. The French sports betting market, although open since last year, is far from a success. Indeed, the market has shrunk radically since licenses were made available, thanks to a far from operator-friendly taxation regime and rules that mandate high takeout on bets made by players. In the past year, gross gaming revenues have fallen by a quarter in France, despite the arrival of new entrants in the market and hundreds of millions of euros of marketing spend there. Media companies such as Amaury Group and Eurosport have all gone into the market and withdrawn again, finding no profit. The French regulator Argel recently noted that they believe at least 20% of the online betting market continues to be grey, but operator estimates are far more cynical. Many operators believe up to 65% of sports betting in France still remains untaxed and unlicensed. What then is the Greek market online potential? Our researchers estimated at Gambling Data that the current Greek online betting market is already worth 210 million to 260 million in net gaming revenues. To come to this figure, we worked with the leading providers of sports betting, including Sportingbet and bwin, Betfair, Centerbet and William Hill, and combined their revenues attributed in their filings to the Greek market. To give an example, bwin Party, in their merger prospectus of 2010, conceded Greece was worth at least 11% of their 2009 net gaming revenue, a figure that amounts to around 41 million euros. Other operators known to operate in Greece, but where there is no information on their earnings splits, include Bet365, BetClick, 888, Unibet and PokerStars, along with the Cyprus-based Casino 848 and Poker 848. So clearly the success of any future regulated online gaming market in Greece will be entirely dependent on bringing within the controlled market a majority of those operators still currently drawing revenues from Greece. I want to summarize the key regulated market differences, and this perhaps overlaps with something that Manuel said, but go a little closer into look a little more closely at the taxation issue, and probably the key point of difference. Italy has a 20% tax on gross profits for casino games and cash poker, a 3% tax on turnover for tournament poker, and a 2.5% tax on turnover for sports betting. Consequently, the Italian regulators have issued dozens of licenses and have been able to bring within the regulated market most of the operators that formerly offered into the country from abroad. By contrast, France, which is the largest country so far to introduce a ring-fenced gambling regime, does not regulate casino games, but has an effective turnover tax of 8.5% for sports betting and a 2% tax on buy-ins for online poker. This taxation regime, combined with the low returns to players we've talked about, has seen many operators quickly abandon the market. And a number of the best-known operators well-liked by French punters continue to offer into the country from offshore locations. The high turnover tax for sports betting in France has been the subject of a lot of debate. Even the AGEL president, Jean-François Villot, has now stated that the system does not work. But the senator charged with reviewing French gambling taxation, Senator Lamour, has now postponed the delivery of his report on any potential tax changes until the French presidential election. Once again, political uncertainty will delay any reform of the French gambling market. So reforms could not be adopted until April 2012 at the earliest, with most sources indicating a date in 2013, and many believe there will be no change at all. And finally, on taxation, it may be worth mentioning that in the coming months, 2 new jurisdictions will enter the picture in Europe. Newly regulating Denmark has a tax of 20% of gross gaming revenues for online wagering and online casino, while Spain will have a rate of 25% of net profit for online casino games and poker and fixed odds sports betting. Moving on to the question of liquidity. So far, the most populous jurisdictions, such as France, Italy, and Spain, do not allow liquidity sharing between countries, but the potential for this is real. Due to its population of just 5.5 million, Denmark has taken a route which will see it sharing liquidity and player pooling for poker licensees, allowing licensed poker operators to create much bigger poker games and pools of players outside of Denmark. Server location requirements we've looked at earlier. Jurisdictions such as Italy, Spain, and Denmark allow for servers to be located outside of the jurisdictions, provided they're located in the European Economic Area, while France and Belgium require servers to be located on national territory. Greece, in its new law, requires similar restrictions. Bilateral agreements are another important and emerging trend. A number of jurisdictions have signed so-called bilateral agreements between regulators, the most notable being between AGEL in France and ARMS in Italy. Others are set to be signed between Denmark and Alderney in the Isle of Man. All of this trend reflects a call by the European Parliament's IMCO report and by MEP Kreutzmann for greater cooperation between jurisdictions. And it's likely this trend will continue to grow over the coming years. Moving on to payout rates. In France, there is a maximum payout rate of 85% of return to player, whereas in Italy the payout rate is 90%. And the difference between those two markets we've already seen. A low payout rate can absolutely impact on competition, as has been voiced by those who've criticized the French sports betting system. And black market offerings are always able to offer a much higher payout rate. Finally, just moving on to in-play differences, which is an interesting element of sports betting. In-play betting is probably the fastest growing segment of online gambling at the moment. While Italy and France allow in-play betting, and Spain and Denmark will allow it, other countries like Belgium remain undecided. There are radical differences over what types of bets will be allowed by market. Under the French model, in-play bets are restricted to just goals scored, goal scorers, and match outcomes. In other words, outcomes that can't be influenced by agreement between the athletes or external parties. In Italy, there have been no bets on, for example, throw-ins, free kicks, or even on, apart from in special cases, on goal scorers. The issue of which bets may be offered is set to become more contentious, though, year by year, as sports governing bodies become involved in the debate and assert their rights, or claimed rights. Finally, are there any elements of commonality in the markets we've talked about? Clearly, the most successful European countries, in terms of regulating their markets, are the ones that have been able to offer a workable rate of taxation while ring-fencing their jurisdictions. France, Spain, Denmark, and Belgium all have ISP blocking, payments blocking, and advertising restrictions against operators who are not licensed in their jurisdictions. While Italy does not have a formal payments blocking system in place, part of the recent austerity measures required banks to report player transactions when received from unlicensed websites. And Italy is also examining more formal payments blocking proposals, and is a noted pioneer in the field of ISP blocking for online gambling, having maintained a blacklist for some years. But probably the most striking commonality, though, is inevitability of delay that has occurred in all regulating markets, whether on tax, such as in Denmark, or on asset privatization, such as in the sale of Spain's lottery Lie. So with a number of EU members, including Spain, Denmark, and Germany, all looking to regulate online gambling for the first time this year, I'd like to conclude by noting that any estimates on timing are at best that, estimates. Well, thank you very much for your attention this morning. I'd like to pass over to the first panel of the day, and thank you very much.